Story number 1. Whispers in the Wooden House. Winter in Alaska is a relentless force, shaping the landscape into a frozen expanse of white and silence. My wife, Laura, and I had always dreamed of escaping the chaos of city life, seeking solace in the remote wilderness. When we stumbled upon the Alaska Wilderness Lodge, nestled deep within the towering pines and overlooking a pristine lake, it felt like destiny. The lodge, a charming wooden structure with Gothic architectural details, promised a perfect retreat to reconnect with nature and each other. We arrived on a crisp January evening, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. The lodge stood majestically against the backdrop of snow-clad mountains, its windows reflecting the fading light. Inside, the warmth of the roaring fireplace welcomed us, the scent of pine and cedar filling the air. We settled into our cozy cabin, eager to begin our winter getaway. That first night, as the storm clouds gathered and the wind began to howl, we felt an unusual stillness envelop the lodge. Laura and I sat by the fire, sipping hot cocoa and sharing stories, when a faint sound broke the silence, a soft, indistinct whispering that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the whispers persisted, growing slightly louder and more insistent as the night wore on. "Did you hear that?" I asked Laura, my voice tinged with unease. She nodded, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room. "Probably just the wind. It's pretty intense out there." We tried to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on the comfort of the fire and each other's company. However, as midnight approached, the whispers became more coherent, forming faint words that sent chills down our spines. "I am still here, don't forget me." Laura reached for my hand, her grip tight with fear. "Jack, something's not right." Determined to uncover the source of the whispers, we decided to investigate. Grabbing our flashlights, we began to explore the cabin, moving cautiously through the shadowed corridors. The lodge was beautifully furnished, each room adorned with antique decor and heavy wooden furniture that seemed to hold secrets of their own. We made our way to the back of the cabin, where a small study room lay. The door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, the room bathed in the pale light of our flashlights. On the desk sat a single, old-fashioned lamp, its light casting eerie shadows on the walls. The whispers were louder here, more desperate and sorrowful. As we entered, a cold draft swept through the room, sending shivers down our spines. On the floor, near the window, we noticed something odd, a small, crumpled piece of paper. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling. "Jack, look at this," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. Unfolding the paper, we read the hastily scrawled words. "I still watch over you. Don't leave me here." A sense of dread settled over us as we exchanged worried glances. Who would write something like this? I murmured, my mind racing with questions. Before we could ponder further, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the whispers intensified, now accompanied by a faint, mournful sobbing. The air grew thick with an oppressive presence, making it difficult to breathe. We backed away slowly, the fear escalating with each passing second. "Let's get out of here," Laura urged, her voice trembling. As we turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that knocked us off our feet. The room plunged into darkness as the lamp flickered and died, leaving us in pitch blackness. Panic set in as the whispers morphed into anguished cries, echoing through the room like the wails of lost souls. "Don't leave me, stay with me." The voices pleaded, their desperation palpable. In the darkness, we could make out the faint outline of a figure standing by the window, a man in old-fashioned clothing, his face obscured by shadows. His presence was both haunting and tragic, a ghostly reminder of a past tragedy that had left him forever bound to the lodge. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fear. The figure remained silent, his hollow eyes fixed on us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. The sobbing grew louder, intertwining with the whispers, creating a symphony of sorrow and despair that enveloped us. "We need to help him," Laura whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of sounds. Summoning every ounce of courage, I approached the figure, reaching out a hand in a gesture of peace. "What do you want from us?" The air shimmered as the figure began to fade, his form dissolving into the shadows like mist. But as he vanished, the room grew colder, and the whispers turned into a haunting lullaby that seemed to seep into our very souls. Determined to free the restless spirit, we delved into the history of the Alaska Wilderness Lodge. Our research revealed a heartbreaking story from decades past. A man named Thomas Avery, a solitary cabin dweller who had lived in the lodge with his young daughter, Emily. Tragedy struck when a terrible accident during a blizzard left Emily lost in the storm, and Thomas, consumed by grief, took his own life within the very walls we now inhabited. The whispers and apparitions were his eternal anguish, a plea for recognition and release from his eternal torment. Armed with this knowledge, we decided to perform a ritual to honor Thomas and Emily's memories, hoping to bring peace to their lingering spirits. On the following night, we gathered in the study room, candles flickering around us, their warm glow contrasting the cold darkness. We spoke words of remembrance and forgiveness, our voices steady despite the lingering fear. As we concluded the ritual, the oppressive presence in the room began to lift, the whispers fading into a serene silence. The temperature normalized, and the sense of sorrow that had weighed heavily on us was replaced by a profound sense of calm. We felt a gentle warmth enveloping us, a silent thank you from the spirits we had sought to help. In the days that followed, the lodge felt different, lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The whispers no longer echoed through the halls, and the apparitions had vanished, leaving behind only the beauty and tranquility of the Alaskan wilderness. Years have passed since that winter night, but the memory of Thomas and Emily Avery remains vivid in my mind. Whenever I visit the Alaska Wilderness Lodge, especially during the cold months, I feel a lingering connection to their story, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. And sometimes, when the night is especially quiet and the wind whispers through the pines, I swear I can still hear the faint echoes of their lullaby, a haunting reminder that some souls never truly leave, forever bound by love and lost beneath the icy embrace of the wilderness. Story number 2. Handprints on the glass. Winter in Rocky Mountain National Park was unforgiving. The snowstorm had rolled in swiftly, transforming the picturesque landscape into a monochromatic expanse of white and gray. My family and I had decided to brave the elements for a weekend getaway, seeking solace in the serene isolation that only the mountains could provide. Little did we know, the cold silence of the Rockies harbored secrets that would forever alter our perception of the natural world. It was the second night of our trip when the true horror began. We had set up camp near a secluded clearing, surrounded by towering pines and the distant silhouette of rugged peaks. The first night had been peaceful, the crackling of our campfire providing a comforting backdrop to the howling wind outside. But as the hours dragged on, the storm intensified, the wind battering our tent with relentless fury. Around midnight, with the storm at its peak, we retreated to our vehicle, a sturdy SUV equipped for the harsh conditions. Inside, the warmth of the heater was a welcome contrast to the biting cold outside. We sat huddled together, sharing stories and trying to stay warm, the darkness outside pressing in on us from all sides. Suddenly, a faint knocking sound echoed through the cabin, subtle at first, then growing more insistent. We exchanged nervous glances, the hairs on the back of our necks standing on end. Probably just the wind, my husband, Mark, suggested, attempting to ease the tension. But the sound persisted, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone tapping gently on the window pane. Curiosity and unease mingled within me as I reached for my phone to turn on the interior light. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the interior of the vehicle. I scanned the windows, my heart racing, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe it's a branch hitting the glass, my daughter, Lily, reasoned, though her voice trembled slightly. I glanced back at the window, feeling an inexplicable urge to look more closely. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed something chilling, a faint imprint on the frosted glass, the unmistakable shape of a small handprint. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm's rage. Mark nodded, his expression grim. "Stay calm. It's probably just an accident, like a branch or something." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was an eerie stillness that accompanied the handprint, a presence that felt malevolent and unnatural. We tried to rationalize the phenomenon, attributing it to the harsh weather and the play of light on the ice. Yet, the handprint remained, a ghostly reminder of something unseen. As minutes turned into hours, the knocking continued, now accompanied by a low, mournful wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the vehicle. Fear gnawed at me as I remembered the legends and local folklore about the Rocky Mountains, stories of lost souls and restless spirits that roamed the wilderness, forever trapped by tragedy and unable to find peace. I glanced at Lily, who sat silently beside me, her wide eyes reflecting the same fear that gripped my heart. Suddenly, the knocking ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on us from all sides. We held our breath, waiting for any sign of movement, but nothing happened. Just as we began to relax, the vehicle's temperature seemed to drop further, the air growing colder and more stagnant. My breath became visible in the freezing air, each exhale a visible puff that quickly dissipated. Then, without warning, the handprint began to morph, the edges blurring and the shape distorting into something more sinister. I could feel an invisible presence pressing against me, the sense of being watched intensifying to an unbearable degree. "We need to leave," Mark urged, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "Now." We scrambled out of the vehicle, the storm still raging around us, and trudged through the deep snow towards our campsite. The darkness seemed to close in, the trees towering overhead like sentinels guarding ancient secrets. Every step felt heavy, the weight of the unseen forces pressing down on us, urging us to turn back. As we reached the clearing, the snow began to settle, the storm gradually subsiding. We set up camp hastily, the warmth of the fire a desperate attempt to fend off the lingering chill. But the feeling of being watched never left us, a silent sentinel that followed us even in the safety of our camp. That night, as we sat around the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows on our faces, we couldn't shake the memory of the handprint and the malevolent presence that had haunted our vehicle. We spoke in hushed tones, sharing our fears and trying to make sense of the inexplicable events. Lily clung to me, her small hands pressed against my arm, seeking comfort in the midst of our shared terror. As dawn broke, the first light of day revealed the aftermath of the storm, a pristine, untouched landscape that belied the horrors of the night before. We packed up our gear, the experience leaving an indelible mark on our minds. The legends of the Rocky Mountains had become our reality, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. In the days that followed, we tried to move on, returning to our routines with a newfound respect for the mysteries that nature conceals. But the memory of that night lingered, a constant reminder of the unknown forces that lie hidden beneath the surface. We never spoke of it again, the fear too raw and the experience too terrifying to revisit. Years have passed since that fateful winter night, but the memory remains vivid in my mind. Whenever I drive near Rocky Mountain National Park, especially in the dead of winter, I can't help but glance towards the snow-covered peaks, feeling a lingering sense of unease. The handprint on the glass serves as a ghostly reminder that some places hold secrets beyond our understanding, and some spirits never find peace. And sometimes, when the night is especially silent and the snow falls gently, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of knocking on my window, a chilling echo of the restless spirit that once sought refuge in the frozen wilderness. Story number 3. The Silent Passenger. Winter in Chicago had a way of seeping into your bones, turning the bustling city streets into a desolate expanse of white and gray. The cold was relentless, a constant companion that made every breath visible and every step a battle against the biting wind. As a taxi driver, I had seen my fair share of oddities during these long, dark nights, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that frigid January evening. It was around midnight when my meter buzzed, signaling a pickup request from the outskirts of town. The address was nondescript, a small, abandoned cemetery on the edge of the city, a place most people avoided, especially after dark. Nevertheless, I accepted the fare, knowing that drivers like me sometimes had to take the less traveled routes to make ends meet. The streets were eerily quiet, the snow-covered sidewalks gleaming under the dim glow of streetlights. I navigated through the empty roads, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the silence. When I arrived at the cemetery, the gates were ajar, swaying gently in the cold breeze. A solitary figure stood by the entrance, their form barely visible against the shadowy backdrop. As I approached, I noticed the man was dressed in a long, gray coat, his face obscured by the brim of a worn hat. There was something unsettling about him, an aura of sorrow that seemed to cling to his very being. He didn't say a word, merely gesturing for me to follow. "Need a lift?" I asked, trying to mask the unease in my voice. He nodded silently, stepping into the back seat of my taxi without a word. The door closed behind him with a soft thud, and I glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting his hollow gaze for a brief moment before focusing back on the road. We drove in silence, the only sounds the engine's steady drone and the occasional crunch of snow under the tires. The cemetery loomed in the distance, its mausoleums and tombstones casting long, ghostly shadows across the landscape. As we approached, the man pointed forward, indicating the specific location where he wanted to be dropped off. I pulled up to an old, dilapidated tombstone surrounded by overgrown weeds and crumbling stonework. The cemetery was deserted, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I turned to notify him of our arrival, but when I glanced back at the rearview mirror, my heart skipped a beat. The back seat was empty. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, but there was no one. The doors were locked, the windows showing nothing but the desolate cemetery outside. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. "Mr. Thompson?" I called out, addressing him by the name he had provided when booking the fare. There was no response, only the eerie silence of the abandoned graves. I cautiously stepped out of the car, the cold biting at my skin, and approached the tombstone where he had asked to be dropped off. As I reached out to touch the cold, hard stone, a sense of dread washed over me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a text message from Mr. Thompson. "Don't trust what you see. Leave now." I glanced around, the wind howling through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. The cemetery felt alive, the shadows moving with a sinister intent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something that shouldn't exist in this world. Suddenly, a low, mournful wail echoed through the night, the sound of grief and despair that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath my feet. I turned back to my taxi, the back seat now empty, and felt an invisible force tugging at my sanity. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I decided to return to my car and investigate further. As I approached, the wailing intensified, the sound wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I opened the door, half expecting to see Mr. Thompson sitting there, but there was nothing, only the stillness of the night. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling, when a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut, locking me inside. Panic surged through me as I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The temperature inside the car plummeted, my breath visible in the freezing air. The silence was broken by the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling the vehicle. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my eyes wide with terror, but there was no one to be seen. The wailing had stopped, replaced by the unsettling sound of whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Leave now." The voices hissed, their words indistinct but filled with malice. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call for help, but there was no signal, only static and the faint echo of the wailing that had returned. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until I felt a cold hand press against my shoulder, freezing me in place. "Don't stay here," the voice warned, its tone desperate and filled with sorrow. "He's watching." I spun around, but there was nothing, only the empty streets and the desolate cemetery beyond. The oppressive feeling of being watched intensified, a presence lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening, but the fear clouded my thoughts. In a last-ditch effort to escape, I kicked at the door, my movements fueled by sheer panic. The door finally gave way, and I tumbled out of the car, the cold air biting at my skin as I fled down the snowy road. The cemetery disappeared behind me, but the feeling of being followed lingered, the whispers still echoing in my ears. I ran until my legs could carry me no further, collapsing against a tree, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The sky began to lighten as dawn approached, the storm finally subsiding, leaving behind a landscape transformed by the night's terror. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, I glanced back at my taxi, now empty and silent. A sense of relief washed over me, but it was short-lived as I saw it, a faint glow emanating from the back seat, the silhouette of a man in a gray coat standing there, watching me with hollow eyes. I let out a blood-curdling scream, scrambling to my feet and running away, the image of Mr. Thompson's ghostly presence burning into my mind. The whispers returned, now mingling with the cries of the lost souls that haunted the cemetery, a never-ending cycle of sorrow and despair. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory of that night. The abandoned cemetery, the silent man in the gray coat, and the chilling whispers that still echoed in my dreams. I shared my story with colleagues and friends, but most dismissed it as the result of a cold-induced hallucination or the stress of the job. But deep down, I knew what I had experienced was real. The presence of something otherworldly lingered in the corners of my mind, a constant reminder that some encounters leave lasting scars, both seen and unseen. I decided to return to the cemetery, hoping to find some answers and perhaps lay the restless spirit to rest. Armed with determination and a healthy dose of skepticism, I ventured back into the snow-covered grounds, the cold biting at my skin as I navigated the familiar paths. As I reached the old tombstone where it all began, the air grew still, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I knelt down, tracing the faded letters carved into the stone, a memorial to those who had passed but were still bound to this place. "Mr. Thompson," I whispered, my voice breaking the silence. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm sorry for what happened." The temperature dropped further, and the air around me seemed to shimmer with an ethereal light. The ghostly figure of Mr. Thompson appeared once more, his hollow eyes staring into mine, filled with an unending sorrow. "I was lost," he murmured, his voice echoing through the stillness. "I couldn't find my way back." Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached out, my hand trembling. "Let me help you," I pleaded, hoping to ease his torment. He extended his hand, a silent request for release, and as our fingers touched, a surge of warmth spread through me, melting the cold that had gripped my heart for so long. The whispers faded, replaced by a sense of peace that enveloped us both. "Thank you," he whispered, his form beginning to fade into the morning light. "Finally free." As he vanished, the oppressive feeling lifted, and the snow around me seemed to sparkle with a newfound brilliance. The first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the cemetery, signaling the end of a long, harrowing night. I stood up, feeling a sense of closure that had eluded me for so long. The memory of Mr. Thompson's silent plea and his eventual release lingered in my heart, a testament to the thin veil between our world and the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. Years have passed since that night, but the experience remains vivid in my mind. Whenever I drive through the quiet outskirts of Chicago during winter, especially near the abandoned cemetery, I feel a lingering connection to the souls that roam the night. The whispers of lost souls and the presence of those who couldn't find peace serve as a haunting reminder that some encounters transcend the boundaries of life and death, leaving behind echoes that can never be silenced. And as the snow continues to fall, covering the city in its cold embrace, I remember that night, the silent passenger in the gray coat, and the power of compassion to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, ensuring that no soul remains lost to the darkness. Story number 4. Whispers of St. Elmo. Winter in Savannah was a time of eerie beauty. The city's historic charm, with its cobblestone streets and majestic oak trees draped in Spanish moss, took on a haunting allure under the pale light of January moonlight. But amidst this picturesque setting stood St. Elmo's Cathedral, a Gothic masterpiece that had watched over the city for centuries. Its towering spires and intricate stained glass windows were a testament to craftsmanship long forgotten, yet in the dead of winter, the cathedral seemed to breathe with its own dark secrets. I had always been fascinated by old churches, their silent halls echoing with stories of faith, sorrow, and sometimes the inexplicable. As a night security guard at St. Elmo's, my nights were typically uneventful, patrolling the vast interior, ensuring that no trespassers disturbed the sacred grounds. However, January brought with it a sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake off. The first sign was the bells. Every night at precisely midnight, the ancient bell tower would ring out, its mournful toll resonating through the empty streets. The bells were a part of the church's charm, a ritual that signaled the passage of time. But lately, they seemed different, more sorrowful, almost pleading. The staff and I would exchange worried glances, wondering why the bells rang when no one was inside to hear them. One particularly frigid night, as the wind howled through the narrow streets and snowflakes danced wildly in the storm, I decided to stay late, determined to uncover the source of the unsettling changes. The church, illuminated by the soft glow of its stained glass windows, stood silent against the raging storm outside. I made my way to the bell tower, the wooden stairs creaking under my weight, each step echoing ominously in the vast, empty space. Reaching the top, I gazed out through the large arched windows, watching the storm batter the cathedral's facade. The bells were silent tonight, but an unsettling feeling lingered in the air. As I prepared to leave, a faint sound caught my attention, a soft, melodic chant that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the tower. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the words indistinct yet filled with a haunting sorrow. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the freezing air. The chant grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it was a hymn that hadn't been sung here in decades. Panic set in as I spun around, trying to locate the source. That's when I saw it, a silhouette standing in the far corner of the tower, cloaked in shadow. It was the figure of a priest, his form barely visible against the darkened backdrop. I took a hesitant step forward, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure remained still, his eyes hollow voids that seemed to stare directly into my soul. I felt an inexplicable pull, a force urging me to approach. As I moved closer, the air grew colder, the walls around us seeming to close in. "Who are you?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. The priest's form began to shimmer, his edges blurring like smoke. Before I could react, he vanished, leaving behind only the lingering chill and the fading echoes of them. I stood there, shaken, unsure if what I had witnessed was real or a figment of my imagination fueled by the storm's fury. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I delved into the church's archives the next day. The old records revealed a tragic story from the late 1800s, a priest named Father Samuel Elbridge who had served St. Elmo's with unwavering devotion. But his life had been marred by sorrow when his beloved daughter, Isabella, fell victim to a mysterious illness. Unable to save her, Father Elbridge had succumbed to grief, his spirit said to wander the cathedral, forever mourning his lost child. As I read through the faded pages, a chill ran down my spine. The legend of Father Elbridge mirrored the strange occurrences I had been experiencing. Determined to find answers, I decided to spend another night in the cathedral, hoping to communicate with the restless spirit. That night, the storm returned with even greater ferocity, the wind howling like the lament of lost souls. I set up my watch station near the main altar, the grand chandelier above casting long, wavering shadows across the stone floor. As midnight approached, the familiar silence settled over the church, broken only by the distant roar of the storm outside. Suddenly, the bells began to toll, their sound both beautiful and heartbreaking. I felt a surge of determination as I prepared to witness whatever lay ahead. The chapel doors remained closed, but the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, leading me towards the rear of the church. Following the sound, I found myself in the old confessional booth, its wooden frame worn and weathered by time. The air was thick with a sense of sorrow, the walls humming with the weight of unspoken grief. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold wood, and the atmosphere shifted, an oppressive heaviness settled around me. Then, out of the darkness, she appeared, a figure of a young woman, her eyes shimmering with an unnatural light. Isabella Elbridge stood before me, her beauty untouched by the passage of time, yet her presence was filled with a haunting sadness. Her eyes met mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of longing and despair. "Father," she whispered, her voice a gentle lament that echoed through the silent church. "Help me." Tears welled up in my eyes as I took a step forward. "Isabella, I'm so sorry for your loss. How can I help you find peace?" She extended her hand, her fingers delicate and ethereal. "You must remember us, never forget the love and sorrow that binds us to this place." As I reached out to touch her, the air grew colder, and the walls around us seemed to ripple with the intensity of her emotions. The hymn began to play again, louder this time, filling the church with its mournful melody. I felt a connection, a deep understanding of her pain and the eternal bond between father and daughter. But before I could respond, the storm outside intensified, lightning flashing through the stained glass windows, casting vivid colors that danced around the chapel. The sound of breaking glass filled the air, and the church began to shake, the very foundation trembling under the force of the storm's wrath. "Isabella, stay with me," I pleaded, holding her hand tightly. "We can find a way to let you go." Her eyes glistened with tears as she nodded, her form beginning to fade like mist under the morning sun. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice growing fainter. "Remember us." As she disappeared, the hymn reached its crescendo, the sound enveloping the entire church. The storm outside began to abate, the wind dying down and the snow settling gently around me. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by a serene stillness that filled the space. Exhausted but fulfilled, I sat back in my chair, the weight of the night's events settling over me. The legends of St. Elmo's were true, the spirits of those lost still wandering the sacred halls, yearning for remembrance and peace. I knew my role was to honor their stories, to ensure that the love and sorrow of St. Elmo's would never be forgotten. Years have passed since that night, but the memory of Isabella's eyes and Father Elbridge's sorrow remains vivid in my mind. Whenever I patrol the cathedral, especially during the cold months, I feel a lingering presence, a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the spirits that linger in the shadows. The bells still toll at midnight, their mournful sound a testament to the enduring connection between the living and the dead, and the stories that echo through the ages within the Gothic arches of St. Elmo's Cathedral. And sometimes, on particularly silent nights, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of a hymn, a haunting melody that weaves through the rafters, reminding me that some souls never truly leave, forever bound to the places they love and the memories that define them. Story number 5. Whispers in the Blizzard. Winter on Mount Washington was unforgiving, a relentless force that tested even the most seasoned mountaineers. The snowstorm had arrived without warning, transforming the familiar trails into a labyrinth of white chaos. My friends and I had embarked on what was supposed to be a challenging yet exhilarating climb, but as night fell, the true nature of the mountain revealed itself. We had set up our base camp at the summit, the wind howling around us like a chorus of lost souls. The temperature plummeted, and the snowflakes danced violently in the frigid air. Wrapped in layers of insulated gear, we huddled together, sharing stories to keep our spirits up. The camaraderie was our only solace against the biting cold and the oppressive darkness that enveloped us. Around midnight, as the storm raged on, I heard it, a faint, haunting melody carried by the wind. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on my ears, but the melody grew clearer, more distinct. It was a song, sweet and sorrowful, echoing through the empty expanse of the mountain. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I glanced at my friends, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of our headlamps. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the storm. They nodded, eyes wide with a mix of fear and intrigue. Without saying a word, we decided to follow the sound, our footsteps crunching in the deep snow. The melody seemed to guide us, leading us away from the safety of our camp and deeper into the heart of the storm. After what felt like hours, the singing led us to a small cave nestled between two towering pines. The entrance was partially obscured by snow, making it difficult to see inside. The sound emanated from within, drawing us closer with an inexplicable pull. I took a deep breath, the cold seeping into my lungs, and stepped into the darkness. The cave was cold and damp, the walls slick with ice. Our flashlights pierced the gloom, revealing a narrow passage that wound deeper into the mountain. The singing was louder here, filling the space with its eerie beauty. As we moved forward, the temperature dropped even further, our breaths visible in the frigid air. Suddenly, the singing ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on us from all sides. I felt a shiver run down my spine as a sense of unease settled over me. Turning to look back, I saw that my friends had stopped, their expressions mirroring my own fear. "What now?" Mike asked, his voice shaky. Before anyone could respond, a distant, guttural growl echoed through the cave, sending waves of panic through our group. We turned to run, but the passageway seemed to stretch infinitely, the exit slipping further away with each step. Desperate, we stumbled through the darkness, the sound of our own ragged breathing the only noise that accompanied us. As we reached a larger chamber, the true horror of our situation became apparent. Handprints were etched into the ice-covered floor, large and distorted, leading down a sheer cliffside that descended into the abyss below. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the ominous markings, realizing that whatever was out there was following us, closing in with every passing moment. "We need to go back," Sarah urged, grabbing my arm. "This isn't right." But fear had already taken hold, and our collective panic propelled us forward, away from the handprints and deeper into the cave. The temperature continued to drop, and the oppressive darkness seemed to grow thicker, swallowing us whole. The silence was broken only by our frantic footsteps and the occasional distant roar that reverberated through the mountain. In the midst of our desperate escape, the cave opened up into a vast, frozen chamber. The walls sparkled with icicles, and the air was thick with frost. At the center stood a figure, its presence both majestic and terrifying. It was a woman, her form translucent and ethereal, eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Her hair flowed around her like liquid silver, and her voice echoed in our minds rather than our ears. "Why do you follow the song?" she asked, her voice a haunting melody that resonated deep within us. We stood frozen, unable to respond, as her gaze bore into our souls. The air around us seemed to shimmer, and the ground beneath our feet began to crack, snow spilling from the fissures like tears. The woman's expression was one of profound sadness, her eyes reflecting a pain that transcended time. "I was lost," she continued, her voice filled with sorrow. "Searching for a way back, a way to be free." Suddenly, the chamber began to collapse, ice falling like hailstones around us. The temperature plummeted further, and the sound of shattering ice filled the air. Panicked, we turned to run, but the exit was blocked by a wall of ice that formed instantly, trapping us inside. The woman's form flickered, her presence fading as the chamber sealed shut. "We can't leave," Mike shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "What do we do?" Despair settled over us as the reality of our situation sank in. The storm outside had intensified, the wind howling like a chorus of the damned, and the temperature inside the cave was now unbearably cold. Our breaths came in short, desperate gasps as we huddled together for warmth, the memory of the woman's sorrowful eyes haunting our every thought. Hours passed in a blur of fear and uncertainty. The woman had vanished, but the sense of her presence lingered, a constant reminder of the darkness that surrounded us. We tried to keep warm, sharing body heat and conserving our limited supplies, but the cold was relentless, seeping into our bones and numbing our senses. Just as hope seemed lost, a faint glimmer of light appeared in the distance, breaking through the darkness like a beacon of hope. The storm outside began to subside, the howling wind giving way to a calm silence. We stumbled towards the light, the chamber seemingly opening up once more, revealing a narrow passage that led back to the surface. With renewed determination, we followed the path, the cold still biting but manageable compared to the oppressive darkness we had endured. As we emerged from the cave, the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the snow-covered landscape. Exhausted and frostbitten, we collapsed onto the ground, grateful to be alive. Looking back at the cave entrance, we saw the handprints etched into the ice, now covered by fresh snowfall, hiding the evidence of our terrifying ordeal. The memory of the woman beneath the ice remained etched in our minds, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. In the days that followed, we shared our story with others, some skeptical and others believing in the legends of Mount Washington. But for us, the experience was a testament to the power of fear and the enduring mystery of the wilderness. We never returned to that spot, the echoes of the woman's song and the sight of her sorrowful eyes forever lingering in our dreams. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the memory remains vivid. Whenever I find myself near Mount Washington, especially during the winter months, I can't help but glance towards the snow-covered landscape, feeling the lingering presence of the woman beneath the ice. The mountain holds its secrets tightly, and some stories, I've learned, are best left unexplored, forever whispering their tales to those who dare to listen amidst the storm's relentless fury. Story number 6. The Woman Beneath the Ice. Lake Tahoe in January was a spectacle of nature's duality, pristine beauty cloaked in a harsh, unforgiving cold. The lake, usually a vibrant blue during the warmer months, now lay dormant under a thick sheet of ice, its surface shimmering under the pale winter sun. The surrounding mountains, dusted with snow, stood as silent sentinels watching over the frozen expanse. I had always been drawn to Lake Tahoe, its serene landscape offering a stark contrast to the chaos of city life. As a photographer, the winter months provided the perfect opportunity to capture its ethereal beauty. But this January was different. There was an undercurrent of unease that seemed to ripple through the air, a whisper of something ancient and restless beneath the ice. Local legends spoke of the woman beneath the ice, a spectral figure seen by those who ventured too close to the shoreline after dark. They said her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and her presence brought a chill that went beyond the winter's bite. Most dismissed these stories as mere folklore, a product of overactive imaginations fueled by isolation and the starkness of the landscape. I, however, couldn't shake the curiosity that these tales ignited within me. It was on the third night of my stay that I first encountered her. I had set up my camera near a secluded spot where the ice was thick and unbroken, offering a clear view of the lake's depths. The air was frigid, each breath a visible puff that dissipated into the darkness. Wrapped in layers of warm clothing, I sat in my folding chair, the silence of the night broken only by the occasional cracking of ice and the distant howl of the wind. As midnight approached, the temperature plummeted further, and the world outside seemed to hold its breath. I adjusted my camera settings, preparing to capture the subtle nuances of the frozen lake under the moonlight. It was then that I noticed it, a faint, shimmering light beneath the ice, pulsating softly like a heartbeat. My heart skipped a beat as I focused my lens, trying to make sense of the sight. There, just below the surface, hovered the outline of a woman. Her form was translucent, her hair flowing like liquid silver around her face. But what struck me most were her eyes, two bright, glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through the darkness, locking onto my very soul. I felt an inexplicable pull, a magnetic force drawing me closer to the edge. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. There was no response, only the silent presence of her gaze. I reached out a tentative hand, fingers trembling, hoping to feel some connection, some sign that she was real. But as my hand made contact with the icy surface, a surge of cold energy shot through me, and the ice beneath my fingers seemed to liquefy. In an instant, everything changed. The serene beauty of the lake was shattered by a violent jolt, sending my chair tumbling backwards. I fell to the ground, the world spinning around me as darkness enveloped my senses. The last thing I saw was her face, eyes filled with sorrow and desperation, as the ice cracked and splintered beneath me. When I regained consciousness, I was lying on the icy shore, snowflakes clinging to my damp clothes. My head throbbed with pain, and my body ached from the fall. Disoriented, I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in my chest prevented me from moving. Panic set in as I realized I was unable to breathe, the cold air searing my lungs. Desperate, I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was missing from my pocket. My mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. Had I truly encountered a ghost, or was it some strange optical illusion caused by the ice and my own fear? Summoning every ounce of strength, I dragged myself towards the water's edge, my vision blurry from the cold and exertion. As I stumbled forward, a realization dawned on me: I wasn't alone. From the darkness, a figure emerged, the outline of a man standing just beyond the frozen lake. His presence was imposing, his eyes devoid of any warmth or recognition. He moved with an unnatural grace, his footsteps silent against the snow-covered ground. I froze, fear rooting me to the spot as he approached, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on me. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice a haunting echo that sent chills down my spine. I tried to back away, but my body refused to obey, trapped by an invisible force. The man's form began to blur, his edges melting into the snowy night as he extended a hand towards me. A wave of cold washed over me, the air thick with an unspoken plea. "Help me," he continued, his voice now filled with anguish. "I can't leave. I'm stuck here." A sense of empathy overcame my fear, and I reached out towards him, my hand trembling. As our fingers touched, the world around me dissolved into a vortex of white and darkness. I felt myself being pulled beneath the ice, the cold enveloping me like a suffocating blanket. The last thing I saw was his sorrowful gaze before everything went black. When I awoke, I was floating in the icy depths of the lake, the weight of the water pressing down on me. The cold was unbearable, each movement a struggle against the freezing grip of the water. I kicked and thrashed, desperate to break free, but it felt as though something was holding me down, preventing me from escaping. In the darkness, I saw her again, the woman beneath the ice. Her form shimmered in the water, her eyes still glowing with that haunting light. She moved closer, her presence both terrifying and oddly comforting. "You have to finish what I couldn't," she whispered, her voice echoing through the water. "Bring peace to my restless spirit." A surge of determination fueled my efforts, and I fought against the invisible force holding me captive. The memories of that night flooded my mind, the beauty of Lake Tahoe, the chilling encounter with her eyes, and the unending darkness beneath the ice. I knew what I had to do. Summoning every ounce of strength, I broke free from the grip that held me down, surfacing with a gasp of air that burned my lungs. The storm had subsided, the night calm once more, but the lake still held its secrets beneath the frozen surface. I collapsed onto the snow, shivering uncontrollably, my heart pounding with adrenaline and relief. As dawn broke, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, I realized the significance of my encounter. The woman beneath the ice was a tormented soul, forever bound to the lake by unfinished business. It was my responsibility to help her find peace, to bring closure to her tragic story. Over the next few weeks, I delved into the history of Lake Tahoe, uncovering the tale of Emily Hartley, a young woman wrongly accused of a crime she didn't commit. Her innocence was proven too late, and in her despair, she had taken her own life, her spirit now trapped beneath the ice, reliving the anguish of her unjust fate. Determined to honor her memory, I organized a memorial at the lake's edge, inviting the community to remember Emily and acknowledge the mistakes that led to her eternal torment. As we placed flowers and lit candles, the air grew warmer, the oppressive chill lifting as if the lake itself was offering its gratitude. That night, as I sat by the fire, the ice seemed to shimmer with a newfound serenity. The oppressive darkness had lifted, replaced by a peaceful stillness that spoke of closure and healing. I felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that Emily's spirit had finally found the peace it had sought for so long. Years have passed since that winter night, but the memory of Emily Hartley remains vivid in my mind. Whenever I visit Lake Tahoe now, especially during the cold months, I feel a lingering connection to her story, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. And sometimes, when the night is especially still and the snow glistens under the moonlight, I swear I can still see her eyes beneath the ice, watching over the lake with a peaceful grace, forever grateful for the day someone dared to listen and help her find her way home. Story number 7. Eyes in the Wilderness. Winter in Virginia can be unforgiving, especially when traversing the infamous Appalachian Trail. The dense forests, usually teeming with life, become eerily silent under a blanket of snow. As a dedicated hiker, I had always relished the solitude and the challenge that the trail offered. But that cold January night would test my sanity and my very will to survive. It was the third week of my solo trek, and I had chosen a remote section of the Appalachian Trail to find peace and reconnect with nature. The days had been crisp and invigorating, each sunrise painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. However, as dusk approached on that fateful night, a palpable sense of unease settled over me. The temperature had plummeted unexpectedly, and the once gentle snowfall had intensified into a relentless storm. I set up my tent in a small clearing, the trees surrounding me like silent sentinels guarding ancient secrets. The wind howled through the branches, creating a symphony of whispers that seemed almost intelligible. As I huddled inside my tent, trying to stay warm, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around midnight, the storm reached its peak, and the world outside my tent was reduced to darkness and swirling snow. My radio crackled with static, and the only sound was the rhythmic patter of snow against the fabric. That's when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like the distant call of an animal. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on me, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. I unzipped the tent slightly, peering out into the darkness. My flashlight's beam cut through the storm, illuminating the thick forest ahead. There, amidst the swirling snow, I saw them, eyes. Not the eyes of any known animal, but large, glowing red eyes that seemed to pierce through the blackness. They watched me intently, unblinking and full of an unsettling intelligence. My heart raced as I tried to steady my breathing. I grabbed my gear, deciding to head back to my previous campsite for safety. As I stepped out into the storm, the eyes disappeared, swallowed by the night. Relieved yet unnerved, I began the arduous trek back, my boots sinking into the deep snow with each step. But the feeling of being followed never left me. Every now and then, I thought I caught a glimpse of red in the darkness, a fleeting flash that vanished when I turned to look. My mind raced with possibilities, wildlife, hallucinations brought on by exhaustion, or something far more sinister. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of relenting. I found myself disoriented, the trail markers obscured by the heavy snowfall. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. The forest, once a place of solace, now felt like an endless maze of shadows and fear. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that resonated through the trees. It was closer this time, unmistakably real and filled with malevolent intent. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that barely penetrated the darkness. I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if the very ground was pulling me back. In my frantic bid for escape, I stumbled and fell, the cold seeping into my bones. As I struggled to get up, the ground beneath me began to tremble, and the snow erupted in geysers around me. From the chaos emerged a figure, a towering presence cloaked in shadows, its form shifting and indistinct. And there, right above me, were the same glowing red eyes, now filled with an otherworldly rage. A deafening roar filled the air, shaking me to my core. The creature advanced, each step deliberate and menacing. I scrambled to my feet, desperation fueling my flight through the storm. The forest around me seemed to close in, the trees bending and twisting into grotesque shapes that reached out like skeletal hands. As I ran, I tripped over a hidden root, sprawling onto the icy ground. The creature loomed over me, its eyes burning with an intensity that threatened to consume my very soul. I could feel its presence, a suffocating weight that pressed down on me, stealing my breath and my strength. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed my flashlight and swung it towards the creature. The beam of light hit its form, causing it to recoil with a piercing shriek. The eyes flickered, the red glow dimming slightly, giving me a sliver of hope. I seized the opportunity, pulling myself up and pushing forward with renewed determination. The storm began to abate, the snow slowing to a gentle fall as dawn approached. Exhausted and frostbitten, I finally broke through the dense forest and spotted the familiar outline of my campsite. With a surge of adrenaline, I raced towards it, the creature's presence fading behind me like a nightmare retreating with the morning light. Collapsing by the fire I had left smoldering, I wrapped myself in my blanket, the reality of what had transpired sinking in. I had survived the night, but the encounter left an indelible mark on my psyche. The eyes in the forest were no mere trick of light or shadow, there was something ancient and malevolent, a guardian of the wilderness that sought to reclaim what it believed was lost. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize the experience, attributing it to the harsh conditions and my own exhaustion. But the memory lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the natural and the supernatural. I shared my story with fellow hikers and locals, some dismissing it as a figment of a traumatized mind, while others nodded solemnly, acknowledging the legends that spoke of restless spirits and cursed lands. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the memory remains vivid. Whenever I hike the Appalachian Trail in winter, I can't help but feel the presence of those glowing red eyes watching from the darkness, a spectral reminder that some places hold secrets better left undiscovered. The wilderness, with all its beauty and peril, continues to guard its mysteries, ensuring that only the brave, or the foolish, dare to uncover the truths that lie hidden beneath the snow. And sometimes, when the night is especially cold and silent, I swear I can still hear the distant roar of the creature, a chilling echo that whispers through the trees, reminding me that the eyes in the forest are always watching, always waiting.